everyone. Welcome. I'm Colleen Stover with the Aerospace Corporation. This is episode 100 of Aerospace's Space Policy Show. Yay! I can't believe we've made it, episode 100. If you haven't checked out episodes 1 through 99 yet, we do have them on our website. They're all archived there. We have them arranged in research areas. So go to our website, csps.aerospace.org. If you're interested in national security space, click on that. We've got exploration, society, and the future. We've got national and international policies, the business of space, climate change and the environment, and also today's topic, space traffic management, or STM, and debris. It's been in the news a lot lately, and so we're really excited to be talking about some of the policy issues around that. We've got two guests lined up. We've got that I'll introduce in a moment. So the 18th Space Defense Squadron of the Space Force, it's based at Vandenberg Space Force Base. They have for years been supporting a space surveillance network. They have a catalog of all the objects in space, including debris. And they also do an SSA, or space situational awareness, kind of sharing with across the US, as well as with foreign governments and commercial entities. Recently, well, not so recently, but that responsibility for surveying and cataloging and sharing the information is now designated to go to the civil side, away from the military, to free them up for other important responsibilities. So that civil agency, the Department of Commerce, will be taking that over, and that will be within the Office of Space Commerce. The details of all that in terms of how to share budget and funds and personnel and technology has not going to be part of this conversation, and it's much larger than what we are going to do today. But this is more going to be about the services offered, the types of services that the Office of Space Commerce could offer. So our guest today, we've got Ted Muelhaupt. He is a consultant at the Chief Engineer's Office with Aerospace. He's also part of CORDS, or the Center for Orbital and Reentry Debris Studies. He's been in the news a little bit lately. You might have seen him. He was making some great predictions and comments on the rocket body from China, from Long March 5B, that was re-entering the atmosphere uncontrolled. He's also talking to Carson Coursey. Carson is a current intern at CSPS, the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, and he's attending Georgia Tech. Carson, what is your area of study?
Yeah, so at Georgia Tech, I'm studying aerospace engineering as an undergraduate, and I've recently been focusing on space traffic management, space situational awareness, and just trying to address these issues as the commercial space industry grows. So really excited to be here today.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm going to let you kick off our first question with Ted. Go for it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Colleen. So Ted, thank you so much for being here with us today. First question for you. When we're talking about space situational awareness and space traffic management, can you give us some quick backstory on why we need it? And that could be, how we get it today and how we could get it in the near future.
So we've been watching things in space since we started launching things in space. The Space Surveillance Network grew out of a military mission to watch for incoming missiles. And so one of the things we wanted to do is, that's where the catalog came from. We wanted to be able to distinguish things that were in orbit from things that were incoming missiles. And so we started keeping a catalog and predicting when orbiting objects would pass over and pass through those radars. And so this, and that's a key element of why we're making this transition, is that this grew out of a military national defense mission, but really it's a safety issue, and so it becomes a civil issue, and that's really the background of why we're making this transition at all. First object in the catalog is actually the rocket that launched Sputnik. Sputnik was object number 2, and we're now up into the 50,000s of objects that are tracked. And so this has been growing for some time. About a little less than a decade ago, all these new companies started announcing these big plans for space. This is actually the second wave of companies announcing large constellations. Only a couple of them actually launched in the 90s, Iridium and Globalstar. The others fell by the wayside, but as a second wave started coming up and CubeSats started launching. And so there has been in really just the last decade, not even a full decade, a tremendous surge in activity we call new space. And so starting about a little less than, I guess it was about 7 years ago, several of us started looking at what was going to happen to space activity, and we realized everything's going to change. By any metric you come up with for measuring what's happening in space, things are changing an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude. And so the processes that we built in for doing space surveillance and for doing tracking what's up there have just grown and grown, and they're not going to work. So business as usual isn't going to work. And so now the question became, what will work? And fundamentally, the military has a protect and defend mission, but it's doing safety sort of on the side. They're being traffic cops because nobody else can at the moment, and that's what we want to transition to. We want to make this bring that safety mission, that regulatory mission, more to the civil side of government where it belongs.
Thank you, Ted. That's fascinating. It sounds like there are some really interesting transitions happening in this space, unintended, where you're moving from the defense side to the civil side, and just really why that's necessary as space is more commercialized and there are many more actors across the entire world. So thank you, Ted. That was really fascinating. I'll kick it back to you, Colleen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and he touched on the growing number of satellites, not to mention the growing amount of debris that they're tracking. So I'm sure we're going to get into that further. But Carson, you asked me to read a quote. So this is a quote from the Space Policy Directive 3 that came out in 2018. And it's directing that directive set in motion the US government to provide certain civil space traffic management services. So I'm going to read the quote here. They shall continue to make available basic space situational awareness data. This is the civil group that's going to be taking over SSA, and provide for basic space traffic coordination, including conjunction and reentry notifications, free of direct user fees, while supporting new opportunities for United States commercial and nonprofit products and services. And so I think this is pretty basic. Carson, you had a question about it.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. I think, Ted, I would be interested to ask you, what is an example of a service that might be basic versus advanced? Where would you draw the line between those if you had to?
Well, so let me step back one more thing. Space Policy Directive 3 is something that we Aerospace helped bring into being. And when we knew we wanted to transition this to from the military to the civil side, the question, one of the reasons was we wanted to make it better in the process. And it's pretty clear that if you look at what's happening in the commercial industry, is that they're able to move faster, they're able to innovate more, they're able to bring new resources to the table, they get outside of government procurement cycles, particularly the military procurement cycles. The military has a mission where things have to work. And while you certainly want that characteristic in safety, you also want to make certain that you can innovate. So when Space Policy Directive 3 was written, and by the way, it was written by Working Group 1 of the newly reformed National Space Council, they wanted to bring in certain characteristics that would be in the civil agency. One of them is to make certain the door was open for commercial innovation. They wanted to deliberately create room for commercial companies to bring in and get that innovation that happens so rapidly in the marketplace and bring that to bear on space surveillance and space safety. So that was a key element from the start. It's designed in that while we see safety, preventing a collision, as a basic public good and therefore a government function, we want to make certain there is room for commercial market for the commercial companies to innovate, and that means they need to be able to do something that they can make a profit of, because otherwise they won't be there. So this has been a key element of what we tried to do with in this new generation of bringing in moving this to the civil side. We're trying to create room in the marketplace to encourage companies to innovate. So that's a key thing. So we're looking at what's a basic service. One of the basic services that is provided right now is that the Space Force, in the form of the 18th, will issue a conjunction data message warning. They predict in advance where things are going to be. They look for things that come close enough to meet various criteria. Usually probability of collision is our prime one. And then they'll issue a conjunction data message, a warning that says, on this date in the near future, you are going to come close to somebody. That warning is considered a public good because you don't want people hitting one another, because if they do, they're going to make debris, which is a problem for everybody else. And so that's why that's a basic good. A civil example or an extended service might be, okay, the warning's been issued. Now what do you do about it? That might be an example of an extended service.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's really important to just highlight what you talked about there about having that basic service to ensure that the entire environment's not going to collapse. The least common denominator, be it small satellite teams, still can rely on that basic service provided by the government. So thank you, Ted. I think another interesting question that I have for you is, so weather data is a common analogy when talking about maybe basic and advanced services. Can you flesh out that analogy, or even if you have a better one, could you explain that?
Okay, so sticking with that example, the Weather Service, NOAA, which, by the way, the Office of Space Commerce is part of NOAA, they will go out and they predict weather, and they issue tornado warnings and hurricane warnings, and they predict weather for the public good. That data is available and people can use it, and various news stations use it for their weather forecast. But places like weather.com will take that and they'll put a format around it. They're going to use the same basic data that other companies that exist out there. You could go around weather.com, for example, and get at the data, but they add better services. They customize it to your location. They customize it. They'll pick out the elements of the data that are applicable to you. And while they're doing this, they're selling advertising, they're selling other services, they're making this available. That's the kind of thing we envision for space traffic management, is that the basic data will be available, the warnings will be provided as a public good, the things that we are doing now for free as a public good will continue under the Office of Space Commerce. But that extended services and customized services and things that, and perhaps better tracking from commercial sensors, these are the sorts of things that we want to make, create a space and a marketplace for those to come in, so that not only are we continuing this basic public good of space safety, we're making room for innovation and for people to make a profit while they're doing it to improve space safety, because that's a public good.
Yeah, that's interesting. That sorry to butt in there, Carson, but so everyone has their favorite weather app, right? And we swear that some are more accurate than another, but we're all using the same data coming from NOAA. So do you think that there's going to be, just in terms of commercial selling, is accuracy going to be a big part of that question in terms of how well they sell, or what kind of profits they're looking for different services?
Certainly. The first off, this is what I always call the two watches problem. When I have two watches, I don't really know what time it is. There are lots of ways of measuring what's happening in space. And so every time we look up with a radar or a telescope or a sensor, whether it's the government sensor or commercial, we're getting a measurement. How you combine that data to give the best estimate of where something is really a tricky problem, because we've seen cases where we've tried to combine data from some non-SSN sensors, and we've actually made our estimate worse. So getting a better answer with all this data is going to be a key thing. And so, how different companies do this is very much art. The way that the SSN does things is a traditional batch least squares method that Gauss would be proud of. There are other mathematical techniques that other companies swear are better. I think that's to be proven. But when you come up with a scented Kalman filter to estimate where something is, and now you try to combine that with something done with batch least squares, and now you've got a mathematical problem. So combining information to get a better answer is very much an unsolved, well, it's a problem that needs to be addressed. And so the quality of what people of the services people will provide, that's something that is very much in question. And then there's another question: is what is the government's role in certifying the quality of those? Should the government provide a certification service, or should the certification be an advanced service? This is the sort of thing when we're talking about creating room in the marketplace. This is the kind of service we're pointing to as what will the owner operators of these satellites really want to make a better product. The goal is pretty clear. We want enhanced data, we want enhanced services, we want the marketplace to provide those while still retaining room for an assured space safety function that we trust. And so it's a complicated line we have to walk.
That's fascinating. And you touched on a couple of questions I was going to ask there in your answer. I was going to ask you about that, the certification or the vetting or validation of data. But I think it's really interesting to consider that as maybe even a commercial role. So that's really interesting. I wonder if there are any analogies other than weather that sort of come to mind in the validation and vetting aspect. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Can either of you think of any?
So the one I've usually used when I talk about this is that a key element of this is called out in Space Policy Directive 3, and it's a key element of what Office of Space Commerce intends to do, is a place they call the Open Architecture Data Repository. And so let's parse that word a minute. Open architecture, meaning we want people to be able to bring things in from the outside. We want this to not be closed. It can't be a system which is totally locked down. Data repository. We want to make data available, and not only the government data, but also some elements of the commercial data, or provide a space for this. So the analogy I usually use in talking about this is that imagine that your local county government sets up a farmer's market, and they take a part of some fairground. They provide parking, they provide restrooms, they provide security, they maybe some weather protection. Maybe the stalls are permanent, maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to provide some lighting. So when the government sets up this farmer's market, they are creating a space where people can come in, but it's the farmers who are the vendors and who actually provide the services. So the farmers bring in their vegetables, their fruit, their perhaps baked goods. It depends on on the market and where they are, and they provide all the services. When we talk about verification of data, that becomes: is there a county health inspector who wanders around? And is that that would be an example of a government service. But you could set aside that for that a farmer could say, I have validated corn here. This is safe because I had it inspected by Joe's inspection service over here, and we all trust Joe. So there, it depends on how this market will evolve. But that's why I like to use the farmer's market analogy. The government has a role in creating the marketplace, but it's the vendors who come in with their products, which actually provide the service people are coming to the market for. Nobody would go to the market if it's empty. So that's the balance we're trying to seek with the OADR.
Yeah, I think that's a cool analogy, because I was thinking something like, the consumer's report or Angie's List to somehow, validate through a commercial way, like people coming to your house and doing work or whatever.
Those are excellent examples of a commercial validation service.
Right.
So somebody coming in and offering a certification or an external check is exactly the kind of service that I can imagine a lot of people are going to want. But on the other hand, is that, should the government do that? Should somebody else do that? If you have a county health inspector, that's one thing. But maybe the reviews on Angie's List are better.
Yeah. No, that's I mean, I trust Angie's List, right? I mean, people pay for that, and maybe people need to ask themselves, if people are willing to pay for the service, then does the government need to use tax money to provide it? Yeah. And so, of course, the U.S. is leading right now, leading this whole push toward. They've been the 18th has been surveying and cataloging things in space for a long time. Moving it over to the civil, opening it up for commercial innovative ideas in terms of how to make profit, but also how to use the data more creatively. And so how important is U.S. leadership in this whole thing? I mean, how important is U.S. commercial leadership important? I know that we're talking about validating data and trusting it and everything. We're talking about bringing in commercial data into the mix. Are we going to be bringing in foreign commercial data? Are we going to be bringing in foreign government data as well? And how does that all work? Or do you know?
Well, there's a lot of open questions there. So it's first off, people talk about space traffic management, and a lot of them will leap further to space traffic control, and that's not at all what we're talking about. When we do it, it's really better defined as space traffic coordination, because fundamentally, space, near Earth space in particular, is an international domain. The U.S. does not own it. The U.S. is not in control of it. And so rules that we make in providing these services are really for a public good. We do provide warnings to foreign systems now, because if a Chinese hits a Russian, the debris is a problem for all of us, regardless of who owns the system. Right. U.S. leadership is right now by default, because we're the only ones providing that service internationally. And in the discussions about Space Policy Directive 2 and Space Policy Directive 3, maintaining U.S. leadership was intended as a key element. So one of the ways to do that is to encourage market innovation and provide this environment where innovation can take place. And if one of the things that I've noted in some of the commercial companies is that they like to get out first so that they define the terms and then let everybody react to them. So first to market is a very important thing in terms of controlling how that market will evolve. It's the same thing with U.S. leadership. If we don't make better rules must be made by somebody. If the U.S. doesn't provide that leadership, then others will. And, it's literally a vacuum that will get filled. So the U.S. staying in front is an important thing. Now, do we control it? No. If we are open about it and we set a precedent and the precedent makes sense and we invite international partners and others to participate, then in that case, that's U.S. leadership. So I think it's important for the development of our own systems that we maintain this, and the best way to do that is to let the market run away with this. Let the things that we do that best encourage commercial industry to take leadership. Because when we first started launching things in space, it was entirely a government activity. The UN Liability Convention says that the launching state owns things forever. Well, who's the launching state on an entirely commercial mission?
Right.
The world has evolved. The commercial activity now dominates space. The vast majority of payloads going up are commercial. The vast majority of the launches are now commercial. It's no longer entirely a government domain. And that's why we need to be able to channel these market forces for our greater good.
So what is some of the wildest innovative commercial things you can imagine or you've read about or heard about that might be provided by commercial in terms of advanced services for SSA?
The one that I first said, really, when I first heard about it was 30 years ago when they started talking about space burials, where they would actually launch cremains, I guess is the preferred term. I found out that they were like lipstick-sized tubes of your ashes, and they launch them into space. James Doohan, Scotty from Star Trek, actually had such a burial. And so these are continuing. Some of the artwork ones that have gone up have been particularly interesting. I've heard in talking about reentries that some companies are thinking of having a coordinated reentry. I can imagine the Nike swoosh, going across the sky as part of a reentry.
Right.
So there are a lot of people with very innovative ideas, and of course, the space tourism ones are always fun to see who's thinking of launching what and how. But companies are thinking of some very important things. I go back to the invention of GPS. GPS was invented as a military device, and it just proved too useful. And now it's a global commodity, and it's a utility that everybody relies on. And it's used everywhere. I mean, we use the timing signals for the ATMs and for gas pumps. We know where the gas pump is. It's right there, and it's not going anywhere. But it still uses GPS to get the timing signal. So that timing information that GPS provides was not something that people were anticipating, and yet the banking industry relies on it absolutely. I expect that commercial companies are going to do the same thing. One of the reasons you're seeing so many of these companies going to very low orbit is because the latency in the signal, the lag in the signal because of light time is simply less than if you go to high orbit. And so, for some financial transactions, that timing's everything. So I don't know that I've heard some of the more exotic things, but it's an interesting phenomenon.
Let me go back to something you said earlier. What improvements can commercial satellite owner operators look forward to once the Department of Commerce takes over the civil SSA STM mission?
So in the things that we're talking about in terms of the role of commercial companies, let's talk about the role of commercial SSA companies. Right now, the Space Surveillance Network has a national security mission. And so the things it watches for most are things that are threats, which tend to be larger. Debris is also a threat, but it gets typically a lower priority for tracking. That's definitely something that commercial companies can help with. They can offer to do better tracking on secondary objects, on typically debris. Since most of the stuff in space is debris, most of the conjunctions are going to be with debris objects. So they can offer, as an enhanced service, better tracking or increased tracking on those secondary objects. So that's one thing. Another is the idea that right now the Safety Service issues a warning that a conjunction is going to happen, but it's up to you to decide to do something about it. A commercial service, an advanced service, might say, we will work out the trade space for this conjunction, plus take into account all of your normal operating procedures and who you want to be close to, and we'll work out the optimum maneuver for you to do that will both mitigate this threat of this conjunction and accomplish other mission objectives as well. While you can get screening through the Space Force if you make arrangements for it, this is definitely something that a commercial company can often do quicker, better, more responsive, more intent. Right now, when the Space Force issues a conjunction warning, it's up to the two parties involved to figure out what to do. Well, something that we'd like to do in this enhanced environment is for the Office of Space Commerce to maintain the database of who's where and who's talking, and so that you don't have to figure out the email of some company that you may have never heard of before. That'll be a central service. So when we move this over to the civil side, these are the kinds of improvements that we're talking about maintaining and making available to people. And the trick is what's going to be commercial and what's not. Now, immediately, the goal is for simply the civil side to take over the safety service from the Space Force. Let them go concentrate on protect and defend. Let the civil side worry about basic space safety. But it's in the long term, the longer term, I hope it's not really long term, that's where we hope to see these improvements.
Gotcha. And what do you think is the importance of norms of behavior in this? Do you see that sort of, if we're talking about straight space traffic management, space traffic coordination, not space traffic control, are the norms there sort of filling those gaps in terms of trying to inform what actors can do in this domain?
Yes, and so let's go back to how things are controlled. You can go all the way to international treaties such as the Liability Convention at the UN or the Outer Space Treaty. But those are really hard to negotiate. And next down are laws. And so some companies will pass laws. Next below that is regulation, or policy rather, where people will define a policy such as we have our national policy on space debris. Below that are regulations and guidelines. The FCC has regulations that you must meet in order to get a license. Guidelines are important. The orbital debris mitigation standard practices are a NASA led document that says these are the things we think are best for minimizing orbital debris. But really, it gets down to standards. I'll use the CubeSat as an example, is that once someone defined a CubeSat standard, and more to the point, the Peapod that said that you can launch several of these at once, now you could get a ride. And what that did is it said, if you can fit in this box, you can get launched. And the CubeSat world took off. At the SmallSat convention in August, we were introducing a concept called the DiskSat, which has a much greater surface area, but is another standard that can be used for defining things. So sometimes a standard opens up the decision space because it takes away all the extraneous stuff and lets you concentrate on a thing that works. Standards are much easier. Norms of behavior are much easier to modify, and because they grow from the bottom up and they grow from what works, and they don't require anybody to vote and pass a law, all at the other end. So that's the most important way we can do things. And I'll use the example of the Chinese reentry, the CZ-5B. The norm of behavior is that if you have a risk above a certain level, 1 in 10,000 is the one the US uses and is recommended in international circles, then you take steps to mitigate that risk. You don't expose people to a higher risk. The Chinese have been properly called out on violating that standard. There's no treaty, there's no law, there's no regulation that they violated, but nevertheless, there was a world outcry because 2 out of 3 of the ones that they've launched have dumped heavy stuff where people are.
Right.
And so
it's
that's what makes
it's risk to humans and property, right? Just to clarify. That
exactly.
1 in 1,000,
That
100,000.
1 in 10,000 is the risk of a casualty to a person.
Okay.
That's the standard we use. So that is a norm of behavior. The way we control space debris is there isn't any international law, but there is the Interagency Debris Coordination Committee, which is sponsored by the UN. It has all the world space agencies, and every year there is an international shaming that takes place where all the member countries have to report how they did. And nobody wants to face their peers and say we screwed up. So even though it's not a law, it is a norm of behavior that takes place. And so that's why getting these things from the bottom up is probably the fastest and most effective way to make things happen. No one wants to be called out by their peers for bad behavior.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ted. That was a great answer.
I know that before you ask your last question, Carson, I have one more too, but go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to ask my last question. So if you have one more, go for it.
I caught you. I know your last question was kind of a fun one. So I just wanted to ask Ted though, is there room for commercial companies to do any basic services? Like, is there a space for that, or are there basic services that might be okay for commercial to do? And on the same kind of side, are there things that might be advanced services that should just be inherently left to commercial and the government not bother?
Well, so there are some services that are space related that owner operators may want that are not currently provided by anybody. For example, if you lose contact with your spacecraft and you're trying to determine what's going on, it is difficult to ask the government to provide extra tracking or take a look with a telescope or see if it's tumbling with the radar. You may be able to get that. It depends on your relationships with the people. That's definitely a commercial services that could be offered. You could get someone to help characterize what's happening with your spacecraft from the outside. And so that's the kind of service that there's certainly room in the marketplace to add. On-orbit servicing and the tracking that would go with it as a tug or a servicing vehicle maneuvers up to your spacecraft. This is a thing that is not provided right now. And so I believe there's plenty of room for these enhanced operations services, which is not just necessarily collision avoidance, but keeping track. If you're occupying a particular orbit, there are only so many objects that can come in your vicinity. A company could offer to track the ones that are a threat to you. So it isn't just a matter of relying on all and worrying about whether you're going to get warned in the general course of things. You can ask a commercial company to pay extra attention to the ones that are a threat to your operations and customize the service. Right. So a lot of the room in the commercial market will be from these customized services, the things that you'll be able to bring in and offer to an operator to track. Sorting, one of the issues is sorting out on initial deployment when you've seen these videos of spacecraft, ping, 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 launching, CubeSats. Identifying which one is which on orbit can actually be tough. That's a service that can be provided for by a commercial company. We will get your initial orbit elements established. So there's room for these services that are not just safety, they're convenience, they're more efficient operations, they will help your operation. And that's where I primarily see the role of commercial companies.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, I'm thinking of like Waze and stuff when I'm navigating to a place. I don't care about where the traffic and police are on other routes, just my route, right?
Exactly. So customizing a service for your operations, that's the sort of thing we expect the commercial marketplace to provide.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Ted, for that really great answer. Looking to the future, kind of a fun question just to wrap up our discussion today. How could commercial space traffic management services expand into cislunar space and even a Martian space? Thinking really big here. What do you think?
Well, we Aerospace are looking at this. The cislunar is really best defined as anything that is beyond geo, where the moon's gravity has a significant effect on where you are. And right now, that space is pretty clean, pretty pristine. We haven't launched enough stuff there to cause much of a problem. But we would like to avoid the problems that we have currently in LEO, where there's just too much stuff and too much traffic. And you also see somewhat at Geo, where at least everything's going the same direction. But it's also crowded. We want to make certain as we expand into cislunar space that we are able to track things reliably, watch where they're going, come up with disposal orbits that will not cause a problem. We all heard recently about this. First it was a SpaceX rocket body, and then it became a Chinese rocket body, and then they're not sure whose rocket. But in any case, an object where nobody was quite sure who it belonged to with absolute certainty slammed into the moon, and it made the news. We want to not have any question about who it belongs to. So that means we need to set up decent surveillance. We need to set up rules. We should come up with disposal orbits. The moon's gravity is funky enough that, and it's influenced by the Earth, that stable orbits around the moon are hard. So what do we mean if we're going to dispose of something? What does it mean to get rid of something? There have been several cases where stages of rockets that launched something to the moon 50 years ago sail off into heliocentric space and then return, and surprise, Earth has recaptured them again. And so this is the sort of thing where we want to work out the rules in advance. If you're headed to the moon, and you look at gravity potential space, the L1 point between Earth and the moon is a spot where that's the low road. That's the pass. If you're going to head them off at the pass, that's literally the pass. People will tend to want to go through L1. So from a surveillance point of view, from a control point of view, L1 becomes an important spot, because not so much for people hanging out there as for transiting through there. And so these are the challenges that are going to come up with cislunar space. Is what should the rules be? How should we watch? How can we set up tracking? GPS only kind of reaches out to the moon. It's not ideal. It's not designed for it. What tracking services, what location services, what should be provided in cislunar space for us, and expand the commercial world out there, and I will note, maintain our national security. We have a national security interest in knowing where things are. So that's why cislunar space it's kind of a new frontier, and we need to work out what should the rules be before we make a mess of it. That's the goal, is to come up with these rules before it becomes a problem.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I imagine norms, as you discussed, could play a large role in that.
Right. Yes. What should the rules be? What should the norms of behavior be? What we'll do is, the U.S. has evolved. We used to, if people offer criticism of things that are happening in space, I'll guarantee you the U.S. made that mistake already at some point in the past. So our hands are almost never clean. But on the other hand, we'd like to learn from our mistakes. And so we'd like other people to not repeat our mistakes, because we know it's a mistake now. So don't do that. And that is the goal. We'd like to be able to set this up for as we extend into that cislunar environment.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Thank you so much for the fantastic discussion today. It's been really great to pick your brain on these topics.
Well, I certainly enjoy talking about these things. I've been with aerospace for a really long time now, and it's questions like this that are fascinating and have they keep my attention.
Yeah, I'm glad to know that you're on the case, Ted, and Cords is on the case. If anyone watching is interested to learn more about aerospace work or Ted's endeavors, definitely check out the Aerospace Cords Center for Orbital Debris Studies website. It's at aerospace.org/cords, CORDS. There's also a whole STM and debris research area on the policy and strategy website that you can check out. So thank you very much, Ted and Carson, for doing this today. I learned a lot, and I hope that we created some good questions for our audience to take away and things to pursue as well. So our technical director is James Liggins. Thanks so much, James. And as usual, all of our shows are available on your favorite podcast platform. And we are very glad to be back for the next season here of Aerospace's Space Policy Show. So see you next time.